Yeah. Anyway.
My folks are officially residents
Oh,
of
no
your
kidding.
district.
Cool.
Yes.
But we did it legal.
I'll get them to sign the petition.
I did, I did it.
Senate will come to order.
That's legal.
This afternoon, we have a devotional by the Reverend Stannard Baker of Cathedral Church of St. Paul Episcopal of Burlington and Archdeacon for the Diocese of Vermont.
Good afternoon.
afternoon.
I was thinking that's a lot of title. So I think we'd all agree that we are living in difficult times, challenging times. I think in the way of these times, something good happens and we all go into this place of hope, and then something horrible or sad or unnerving or frightening happens and we're back in a place of despair. In my view, the opposite of despair is hope. And those two things function together. I want us all to remember to hold on to hope no matter what. Kind of remembering Emily Dickinson's line, hope is the thing with feathers that perches in our souls. So I've got two short poems and a prayer. The first is from Wendell Berry, The Peace of Wild Things, and it addresses despair. When despair for the world grows in me and I wake in the night at the least sound, in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in its beauty on the water and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time I rest in the grace of the world and I am free. The second is a poem called You Belong Here Too by the Reverend Deacon Tim Jones, who's an Episcopal deacon at the church in Hendersonville, North Carolina. He's a Blue Ridge poet, painter, and photographer, and I met him at a recent meeting of archdeacons and deacon leaders. He's quite an amazing guy. I've altered it slightly to reflect a political, not a church setting. So here it goes. It's called You Belong Here Too. When someone says, I want to go to the mountains, it doesn't mean I want to serve on the committee for climbing mountains. It doesn't mean I want to learn all the Latin names of plants living on their slopes. It doesn't mean I am going to measure the height of a summit or I need to break in these new boots. There's nothing wrong with any of those things, but they are not what that means. It is not a secret code. It usually means I want to go to the mountains. I want to see beyond what I currently see. I want to taste clean blue air. I want to stand on the edge of something that matters. I want to feel at home in a world larger than myself. I want to be fully alive, not just sort of living. I want to climb something real. I want to breathe. It's pretty much the exact same thing when somebody says, I want to run for office, or I'd like to go deeper into politics. May we respond like the birds, the trees, and the wildflowers reaching up to the sky along the paths into the mountains. May we respond, welcome, welcome, welcome. You belong here too. Rest in the presence of safety while you get your bearings. And a short prayer from an Episcopal bishop, the Right Reverend Stephen Charleston, an Indigenous American. Be faithful to what you believe. Hold fast to the hope that faith first gave you. Strive to practice what you profess, being open to others who profess differently. Build community, establish sanctuary. Do not be discouraged when you feel like a voice in the wilderness, for from that wilderness comes a message that will be heard. Be faithful to what you believe. Go forward in peace to do what you need to do from the bottom of your hearts.
Thank you very much, Reverend.
Thank you.
Are there any announcements? Seeing none, Under Rule 31, we have a few bills to move by rule. We have H 622, which will move to finance. That's an act relating to emergency medical services. We have H 121, an act relating to enhancing consumer privacy. That will move to the Committee on Appropriations. And we have H 794, an act relating to services provided by the Vermont Veterans Home. That will move to appropriations as well. We have one House bill for reference. H 626, an act relating to animal welfare, introduced on January 4th. That is referred under Senate Rule 44A to the Committee on Government Operations. That brings us to the orders of the day. We will, my understanding is that we will pass over S 25. We will pass over H 534 and move to third readings, beginning with H 27, an act relating to coercive controlling behavior and abuse prevention orders. Are there any amendments before third reading? Seeing none, please listen to the third reading of the bill.
H 27, an act relating to coercive controlling behavior and abuse prevention orders.
Having heard the third reading of the bill, the question now is, shall the bill pass? Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay.
Nay.
The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it, and you have passed H 27, an act relating to coercive controlling behavior. We have third reading of H 546, an act relating to administrative and policy changes to tax laws. Are there any amendments before third reading? Seeing none, please listen to the third reading of the bill.
H 546, an act relating to administrative and policy changes to tax laws.
Having heard the third reading of the bill, the question now is, shall the bill pass? Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and you have passed H 546. We have up for third reading H 868, an act relating to the fiscal year 2025 transportation program and miscellaneous changes to laws related to transportation. I see we have some amendments. I believe the first is to be offered by Senators Perchlik, Chittenden, and others. And for that amendment, I would look to the senator from Washington.
I do not have my copy, so I'm going to wait till I get handed a copy on this. Thank you. So we have two amendments to make sure I'm talking about the right one. So this is what was brought up by the senator from Bennington about the railroads. So we had in this section 31 crossing out language about the agency needing approval from the General Assembly and the governor and the Joint Fiscal Committee and the chairs of the committees on transportation, which we thought was outdated language. And given this federal preemption, which we underline, which is added in here, this 49 CFR, that there wasn't much we can do about the lease conditions, specifically the operating leases, because that's really controlled by the feds. We have control kind of over the agreement as far as how much, maintenance and what the payment situation is going to be. But what mostly people care about are railroads, as the senator from Bennington brought up, is like, can you store propane rail cars next to residential businesses? Can you spray pesticides on the railroad next to a school? All that's federally preempted. So we struck that. The concern was brought to the committee that we should know about these leases. And we also talked to Senator Harrison, who you'll see listed on this bill as well as on this amendment. And so we're adding language to this section that says that agency will notify the committees on transportation when a lease is going to come up within a year. That gives senators a chance to ask for the lease, look at the lease, see if there are terms in there that aren't federally preempted that we want to speak to, that we want to advocate to the agency to make sure they put into the lease, or just look at the lease and make sure that we feel like it's a good lease from the standpoint of the taxpayers. So we added that in to address that concern, and that is the amendment.
Thank you, Senator. Question is, Senator from
Wyndham.
Wyndham.
Thank you, Mr. President. If this is the right time, I'd like to address this amendment.
Would you like to interrogate the proposer?
No, I'd like to make a statement.
This would be the time.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. My name is on that amendment, and I am supportive of the amendment because I think it's better than doing nothing. But I want to explain my reasoning behind the amendment that was proffered by me and the senator from Bennington. I appreciate the senator from Bennington raising these issues. My concern is that by deleting the language the way that it's proposed to be deleted in the T-bill removes the authority of the legislature to have comments, to approve the lease conditions that are negotiated between V-Trans, the governor's agent, and the railroad. I understand that and agree that the agency is the appropriate body to negotiate the lease. That makes sense. But because these leases are hugely consequential, they're 30 to 50 years in length. In the term of the leases are 30 to 50 years. So just by that situation by itself, it should be reviewed by the legislature and by the public, because that gives the public a chance to know what's being promised. My understanding of the federal preemption is that if the state and the railroad could not come to an agreement on a continuing lease, on an existing lease and the renewal of the lease, if the state and the railroad could not come to an agreement on the lease, then that difference would be settled by an agency of the federal government. And that makes total sense, because railroads need to be able to operate across state boundaries. They need to have the same conditions and operations. That makes a lot of sense. What doesn't make sense to me is deleting the ability of the public and through the legislature to have a say on the terms of that lease. What the state will generally receive in revenue, sometimes subsidize a railroad. Those are really important aspects to the state. And again, the term is 30 to 50 years. So while I am supporting the amendment, again, because it's better than doing nothing, I do advocate for more legislative authority. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Question is, shall the bill be amended as offered by Senators Pertwee, Chittenden, and others? Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and you have amended the bill as offered by Senators Pertwee, Chittenden, and others. We have a second handout amendment, I believe, also to be reported by the Chair of Transportation. Senator from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. President. This amendment deals with a section of the central garage, it was section 30, yes, section 30 appropriated $2 million of transportation fund monies to, doesn't appropriate to, they already have the money, it gives them approval. The Agency of Transportation needs our approval for expenditures over $500,000. They want to buy land for a new central garage, which I might remember in the report of the bill. They were looking at land in Berlin. The prior language that we're amending specifically mentioned the address and acreage of that parcel. The town of Berlin raised some concerns. So we're just giving them authority to spend the money without specifying the location. In case that doesn't work out in that location, we're saying when you find a location, you can spend the $2 million for the purpose of purchasing that property. And we're adding language, and you'll see on here, the members of the Transportation Committee, as well as Senator Watson, who was concerned about how the Agency of Transportation was interacting with the town. So we had language in here to require the agency to make sure they're collaborating with the municipality. There's some question about if the agency has to follow all the town zoning regulations. They're, as a state, they're exempt from going through that regular process, but we want to make sure that they're working in a collaborative manner with the town on the future site of this central garage. So that's what this amendment does, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Question is, shall the bill be amended as proposed by Senators Perchlik, Chittenden, Ingalls, and others? Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and you have amended the bill as proposed by Senators Perchlik, Chittenden, and others. It's my understanding that the other amendments will not be offered that are, I believe, in the calendar. At this time, are there any further amendments to H 868, an act relating to the fiscal year 2025 transportation program? Seeing none, please listen to the third reading of the bill.
H 868, an act relating to fiscal year 2025 transportation program and miscellaneous changes to laws related to transportation.
Having heard the third reading of the bill, the question is now, shall the bill pass? Are you ready for that question? Senator from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. President. There was a few questions that I wanted to answer before we vote on third reading. One point that I meant to bring up about the leases, that language about the railroad lease is only for continuing leases. So if there was a new lease, they would need to still get legislative approval. This is for a continuing an existing lease. There was a question about the definition of pleasure car. People were concerned about that. And so I looked it up in the statute, and this is a very satisfying definition. The definition of pleasure car is shall include all motor vehicles not otherwise defined in this title. So that's pretty narrow. And then there was a question about our e-bike incentive and some concerns that we had zeroed out the funding for e-bikes. And so people were wondering that the program, how much money the program still has. The program is about to run out of money. It's under $2,000. So they're only going to be giving a few more incentives. But on the other side, the agency is applying for an EPA grant to do a lot of carbon reductions. And in their plan, in their application is 1.84 million for electric bike incentives. So given that we're pretty confident that they'll get the grant, there'll be more money for electric bike incentives when that grant money comes through. So with that, thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Question is, shall the bill pass? Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and you have passed H 868, an act relating to fiscal year 2025 transportation program. At this point, we will be passing over the third reading of the budget and moving to H 350, an act relating to the Uniform Directed Trust Act. Please listen to the second reading of the bill.
H 350, an act relating to the Uniform Directed Trust Act.
Having heard the second reading of the bill, that bill moved to the Committee on Judiciary, and for that favorable report, I would look to the senator from Wyndham, Senator Heish.
Mr. President, this bill is located on page 2800. H 350 is a bill that proposes to enact a uniform directed trust act in Vermont. It was introduced in the other body with guidance from the Uniform Law Commission and the Vermont Bar Association, and our Senate Judiciary Committee accepted the other body's bill and made no changes. So I'll provide a general overview of the bill. The goal of the act is to address the rising use of directed trusts. Directed trusts allow for a person other than the trustee to have power over some aspect of the trust's administration. This other person is known as the trust director. This act does not change any of the foundational rules and requirements for how a trust is formed. And currently, common law allows for trust directors to be used in trusts, and they are currently being used in Vermont. There are also a number of reasons why a settlor may want a trust director. For example, the director may have financial management experience, or they may live close to the beneficiaries and can more quickly respond to any changes in circumstances. The main question raised by the existence of trust directors has to do with how they interact and collaborate with the trustee, along with what types of responsibilities and requirements they have. Traditionally, trustees are typically in charge of all aspects of the trust's administration. This includes custody, investment, and distribution. However, a directed trust may allocate all or some of that power to a trust director. This power is granted in the trust formation, and the trust director will have the primary fiduciary responsibility, and the trustee will also still be considered a fiduciary. The main sections of this bill that clarify exclusions, powers, limitations, and duty and liabilities for trust directors are located in sections 1305, 1306, 1307, and 1308. Section 1309 provides the duties and liabilities of a directed trustee in the event that trustee is directed by the trust director. Currently, even though trust directors are used in directed trusts in Vermont, there is a lack of simple, predictable, and consistent rules. H 350 proposes to address the absence of rules by expressly permitting the use of trust directors and validating trust terms that provide for their appointment. This includes provisions about how to govern a trust director, how to discern whether a director has duly accepted appointment, and how to differentiate between a fiduciary power belonging to a director and a non-fiduciary power belonging to another party. The Act also provides solutions to some of the practical problems encountered with a trust director, such as establishing rules related to sharing information between a trustee and a director, and the rules for compensation, succession, and appointment. Overall, this act is meant to codify a consistent set of rules for a process that's already happening in Vermont, and the lack of clear rules can lead to uncertainty or challenges in the creation and execution of trusts. And so this act is meant to remedy that. So with that being said, I will spare the Senate from doing a section-by-section walkthrough, but if there are questions, I'm happy to provide clarity on any specific sections. We heard from the chair of the Probate and Trust Law Committee from the Vermont Bar Association, along with Legislative Counsel. The vote in committee was 5-0-0, and I ask for the Senate support.
Thank you, Senator. The question now is, shall the bill be read the third time? Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and you have ordered third reading of H 350, an act relating to Uniform Directed Trust Act. I believe that brings us to H 883, an act relating to making appropriations for the support of government. I believe we do have one, if not more, amendments to consider. So while those are being handed out, I would look to the senator from Caledonia for an explanation of the First Amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. This amendment is, we call it kind of an omnibus, but when you're passing a bill as complex and lengthy as the budget, some things need to be addressed or added. So I'm offering this on behalf of the committee, and I just want to make sure everyone has a copy. This amendment makes changes to section B 1102, and this is our contingent appropriations. we have had some further discussion, and it appears, although it's not yet certain, but it appears likely that in fact we will have more revenues at the end of the year than we projected. Now, when I introduced or reviewed the budget yesterday, I said we had done contingent appropriations of about, I don't know, 39 million. Right now, we're about 36 million ahead, but with the impact that we think Mother Nature and the eclipse might have, it appears that revenues might come in higher. And so there are things that we really wanted to include. So if you go to page 3, the other ones are all intact. We are not changing the order that we had included in the bill as we passed. But I wanted to bring to your attention, starting on page 3, we changed and reordered a bit. I mentioned yesterday that we had 350,000 on the contingent list that would be a loan loss reserve for loans to businesses that had been impacted and had significant losses as a result of the flood. So what we are doing is, you will notice number 14 is, rather than going into a forgivable loan, which in fact has to be treated as a tax expenditure, and going through the complexity of that, as well as many businesses are very leery about taking on another loan because of their financial situation, we wanted to simply do outright grants, which would be much more straightforward. However, in conversations with the chair of the Economic Development Committee, you will see number 13 is new, and that is something that has been brought to our attention, and I know that people may have gotten emails in the past about it, and that is cancer screening for our firefighters. And many of our firefighters are volunteers, and those town departments have very limited budgets. So we are on item number 13, saying $1 million would be if on the contingent list to subsidize the cost of doing that kind of cancer screening for that group of where there's a high risk of cancer as a result of the nature of the work. And number 14 is a replacement for the loan loss reserve, as I just mentioned, and that would just be 5 million. It would go, we kind of dubbed it as VGAP 2. We had 20 million that we had moved ahead in the summer to deal with business losses, and this would just be adding to that money available to our Vermont businesses. Number 15, we had used the caseload reserve money to fund a pilot project for 5 hospitals to move to a global budgeting arrangement. And this number 15 would simply, funds are available, replace the money that we had used to support that pilot initiative. 16 is, and we're getting obviously very optimistic in terms of our money, but in the transportation bill that we've just passed, we used all 25 million of the money that we had reserved for the IIJA match. And for this year, originally we had thought it would be 12.5 this year and then 12.5 next year. But the transportation bill, as we passed it and reviewed it, used all the 25 million in this year. So number 16 is recognizing the fact that we're going to have federal dollars available to us that we need the match next year to draw down. So the 12.5 is really the second year of that 25 million we had originally reserved last year. Number 17, and we were told this could take as much money as we wanted to put that way, and it's a dam safety revolving loan fund. And we know from testimony that's been provided to Natural Resources, we have a number of dams. Many of them are older. Many of them are really of concern in terms of if we had a significant weather event, could in fact pose significant damage and danger to many of our communities. So we thought capitalizing that loan fund and moving more money in was important as we were anticipating future climate events, or obviously minimizing the risk. And I know that if you were in central Vermont, the Wrightsville Dam, that was one of the ones we heard about even on national news in terms of the possible risk of that dam being breached. And number 18, we looked, and one of the things that obviously we're very concerned about is the extent to which we are able to provide alternatives, shelter for people who are without housing. And this would move more money to the Office of Economic Opportunity to expand shelter beds and permanent supported housing capacity in the state. The second instance of amendment is really correcting a mistake, and that was the money is to go to the recovery residences, not centers. We had both, and it's only residents, and we struggled back and forth, and it seems like in spite of our best efforts to make sure we eliminated centers, it appeared. So we just simply are making, hopefully, the final correction on that. The third instance of amendment is anticipating a bill that's coming out of our Health and Welfare Committee, and it has to do with PBMs and work that would be done by DFR. And there are 3 positions in that bill to undertake that work. Certainly pharmacy costs and as it relates to healthcare are very significant. But what this does is say DFR has got to fund the positions out of their revenues, but that means that there's less money to direct app for availability within the general fund. So the third instance of amendment is accommodating that bill. The fourth instance of amendment is, looks like a lot here, but there's 2 things happening. One is we failed to eliminate a position that we didn't fund, and that was a grants administrator. But if you go to page 6, we, after conversations with the administration, we're adding positions to carry out the work that's envisioned in the pre-trial supervision initiative. And so we already have in the budget in base funding, $661,000 to support that initiative. And the whole goal is to get individuals who are currently incarcerated and taking up beds, who are really detainees, out of those facilities. And by doing so, we would free up beds in Vermont facilities and obviously would require fewer out-of-state beds. So what we have here in Department of Corrections, or I mean, not G, and number 1 is the probation and parole officers to provide that that community supervision, since they would not be incarcerated, but in the communities. And the 5th instance of amendment was around case management. I guess we meant it so much that we put it in twice, so we're removing it. We thought maybe once was enough. And the 6th instance of amendment, we had a request to clarify eligibility in that vulnerable group, and we wanted to ask to have it clear that we're talking about a child 19 years of age or under. And then the 7th is just simply dealing with technical changes. And the last, in this 7th amendment, though, E602.2, what we did, and we have in the budget, is base funding to the state colleges, that 1.5 million that reduced the structural deficit. When we were dealing with the state colleges, there was a plan where we would provide bridge funding, where we would increase the base, but there was also a target of 25 million deficit reduction, which could, a structural deficit reduction, which could be done by saving money, by savings. It also could be done by increasing revenues, enrollment and courses and so forth. So what page 7 does is simply recognize the fact that we did 1.5 million to reduce that structural deficit target this year and the next year for a total of 3 million. So what we did is reduce the 25 down to the 22 to reflect that 3 million reduction in the deficit target. So that, Mr. President, is a run through of the amendments that your Appropriations Committee is requesting, and we hope you will concur. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Of Question is, shall the bill be amended as proposed by the senator from Caledonia? Senator from Franklin.
Yes, Mr. President, may I inquire of the presenter of the amendment?
Presenter of the amendment will be interrogated.
Yeah, just a quick clarification on page 4, lines 14 through 16, where it's mentioned Vermont's 13 recovery centers. You had mentioned recovery residents also. Are the recovery residents still available for these grants in this particular?
What we intended to do is to use the money, it's 141,000, to go to grants to the recovery residencies. That was the top priority. There is in a different place money going to the recovery centers, and that would be using the opioid settlement money. So these are where people reside. So the centers are not a 24-hour kind of program. So this is very clear. This money is to go to the residents, and this clarification was requested by the network of providers. So last year, recognizing the housing needs of individuals really dealing with a recovery and needing the support, we had actually funded more of these residencies and this residence, and we are putting this additional funding to support the operation of those residential facilities.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Question is, shall the bill be amended as proposed by the senator from Caledonia? Are you ready for that question? Senator from Franklin.
May I interrogate the reporter?
Senator will be interrogated.
I wonder if the reporter could just tell us, so that we don't have to use our arithmetic skills, what the total amount of the unobligated funds.
Yes, I will tell you that, and we're being very optimistic, but they would come to a little between about 70 million at the end of the year. Whether that will materialize, we don't know, but if in fact, based on where we are now and with the revenues that have yet to come in as a result of a fairly significant influx into our economy as a result of the eclipse, we're just saying if the money is there, then this would be a way in which we would want to utilize those additional funds to support these initiatives. So whether we are conservative or too optimistic, it's contingent. So if the money doesn't come in, there's no obligation to meet the appropriation.
I wonder if the reporter can ask us whether the committee considered that if the additional funds come in, to adding any of them to our reserves.
Our reserves are totally filled. We did not, yes, I would say that we did with the caseload reserve. We put the money there that, as I mentioned, that we were going to use for the 5 hospital pilot for the global hospital budgets. So we did put money to replace that. And the other, I guess you could call it a reserve, and that is the 12.5 that would go to support the IIJA match for next year in the transportation sector. We also have here in the contingent, and that is the replacement to the ANR IIJA match that was removed by the other body in their bill. So we did the 12.5 to IIJA and transportation, 5 million to the ANR reserve for their IIJA funding, and then we replaced the caseload reserve money.
Mr. President, I know just from memory that over the past 20 years, from time to time, we've certainly asked ourselves whether or not the amount of reserves that we have are adequate as time advances and the value of money declines. And the question is whether or not it would have been prudent for the committee to consider expanding those reserves in the event that the contingent funds were available. But that again is probably speculation.
Thank you, Mr. President. We have been building our reserves, and I can't tell you specifically, but I think we have now moved them up to about 14%, which is considered pretty healthy relative to what states have for reserve. So that has been a priority to get them built up. We've created the rainy day reserve as well. We have the caseload reserve, and then we have our statutory reserves that are required for the general fund as well as for the transportation fund. And once again, those are filled to the statutory requirement.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Shall the bill be amended as proposed by the senator from Caledonia? Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and you have amended the bill as proposed by the senator from Caledonia. Senator from Addison, I believe you have a handout.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. The secretary's going to get this to you. I have an amendment that you'll recall that we've had multiple conversations about legislative pay in this chamber and in this body. And as much as I would love to just have an amendment that puts that in the budget, that's not what this does. But what it does do is take a very small slice of that bill that we discussed earlier this session in the Government Operations Committee related to the expenses that legislators are reimbursed for or that we get a stipend for. As you all know, we get stipends for our meals and our lodging expenses, and we get reimbursed for our mileage expenses. And there is a difference. If we are reimbursed for the actual expenses, it is not taxable. If we are given a stipend to offset those expenses, it is taxable. And so in some cases, it can be fairly significant amount of money. And I know that this has been a concern about from many members in this chamber and in the other body. So what this amendment would do is provide the option of choosing whether you want your expenses reimbursed based on the actual amount you expended, or get a stipend, and you would get to choose once at the beginning of the session and then stick with it. The reimbursement could be no higher than what you would have gotten for the stipend. So it's not like you would get more money if you chose reimbursement. If you went out and had a extremely expensive dinner or stayed in a super fancy hotel, you would not get you wouldn't get reimbursed for that full amount. It would only be up to the amount of the stipend. So there's not a fiscal impact on this amendment. So it just provides the flexibility of each member of the General Assembly choosing the option that works best for them. And this was vetted by our legislative operations at the time that the Government Operations was working on this bill. And you can see that the language is it's listed in here, both the meals and the lodging, and it's done multiple times in order to be clear about what it's doing. That's the second instance of amendment. I did it in opposite order because the first incident of amendment is just a technical amendment that was suggested related to the Pay Act. The Pay Act is moving as a separate bill through the legislature, starting over in the House. But if we run out of time and end up having to insert the Pay Act into the budget, this gives us the flexibility of doing so at a later date during the conference committee. So this is just giving us that flexibility to do it based on timing. So that is the amendment, Mr. President. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. The Senator from Caledonia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Appropriations Committee reviewed this amendment, took testimony, and we view it as a friendly amendment and urge support for it. Thank you.
Question is, shall the bill be amended as offered by Senator Hardy? Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and you have amended the bill as proposed by Senator Hardy. Senator from Chittenden North, I believe you have an amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yesterday, I spoke to language on page 69 of this bill. It's at the very bottom. Today, I offer an amendment to strike section 703B. This language, as inserted, defies the fundamental principle of transparency within government. As proposed, works in progress to or from the Office of Legislative Information Technology would be deemed confidential until finalized. One major work in progress is the Information Technology Plan that has been in draft since 2019. That plan is required by statute to be revised and released biennially. This language would prohibit anyone from tracking its progress. One of the Office of Legislative Information Technology's functions is to purchase and manage all the cameras and mics, display screens, and software that allow meetings to be hybrid. How could a draft IT plan dealing with hybrid meetings be improved without the input of the legislators and the public that participate remotely? This bill's language squelches the ability to help improve an overdue plan. On a beautiful day like today, I'm reminded that sunshine is the best disinfectant. The policy language inserted into this budget bill does not belong here in 703B. It just clouds the ability of those who are experts in an area or those who are merely curious to know what progress is being made. The language on page 69 thwarts interested parties before they can even ask how the new ADA compliant sound system for hybrid meetings is coming along, or why closed captioning isn't accurate to FCC standards. The ability of any one of us, including members of the public, to provide meaningful input or to act as a check and balance on plans being produced is another principle I believe is fundamental to our democratic process. Back in the business world, we had a name for this. It was called peer review. It is a bit baffling to me why we would send in the clouds to obliterate the sunshine of input on millions of dollars in expenditures by the Office of Legislative Information Technology. Perhaps you're aware that this office was created in 2019 by Act 144 that popped out of the Rules Committee on the very last day of the session. No Senate committee with jurisdiction over IT, I'm told, reviewed it or took testimony. COVID hit during the session that followed. In the meantime, millions of dollars were spent on technology to continue continuity of operations without an IT plan and without public engagement. 5 years later, requests made for the current IT plans guiding principles, priorities, and strategies are met with an admission that the plan isn't done. 2 VSA section 704 specifies that the Director of Legislative IT shall prepare, maintain, and update, at least biennially, a long-range strategic plan for information technology operations and services in the legislative branch. With the advent of remote participation in both committee meetings and floor sessions, this topic is no longer the exclusive domain of information technology professionals. Instead of including a policy statement on IT in this big bill, this language should be reviewed by committees of jurisdiction to understand the implications of stopping the flow of information to interested parties or informed parties. Now, it would be easy for someone to write off the concern I bring today as someone else's issue. Actually, I was all about transparency for 17 years in local government. And as a member of the Joint Information Technology Oversight Committee here in the Senate, I continue to want to be able to ask for and review relevant items, even in draft format, especially in draft format. Waiting for final reports denies all of us the ability to contribute meaningfully along the way. I hope that you, my fellow senators, will join me in voting yes for this amendment to strike 703 to preserve transparency and continue checks and balances in the review of information technology, plan drafts, and other reports. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. The Senator from Caledonia.
Thank you, Mr. President. This proposed amendment was not brought before the Appropriations Committee for discussion. So I would ask for a brief recess so that the committee could give consideration to the amendment, please.
I'll declare just a brief recess. Senate will come to order.
One or the other.
That's why Senator from Caledonia.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Appropriations Committee has had a chance to consider the amendment. You will note that in fact, this language relates to any work in progress, whether it's the Office of Information Technology or Legislative Council or Joint Fiscal Office. As I mentioned yesterday, oftentimes when you're in draft, sometimes things are not included that need to be included. Some things need to be corrected. And so it's a work in progress, perhaps a little bit like negotiations underway. And an example might be Pay Act, which was negotiated and only made public in the last week or so. Also, in looking at what we have for statutes, if there in fact is an issue around the timely response or workload with any of the legislative offices, then that can be taken up by, we have created a legislative management committee. But I would like to read from the statute around the plan. And this is in Title 2, Section 704. And it says, in preparing the plan, the director or designee shall consult with members of the Joint Information Technology Oversight Committee, other members of the General Assembly, and employees of other legislative staff offices. In addition, the director or designee may also consult with the state archivist, representatives of the executive and judicial branches, and members of the public. And the strategic plan, obviously, shall be subject to review and approval by the Joint Legislative Management Committee. So there is a process for input, but there's also a process for legislative review and approval of the plan. So the consensus of the Appropriations Committee is that this language that treats our Office of Information Technology in the same way as the other two offices is one that we feel is important to making sure our work can go forward in a expedited and thoughtful way, and make sure that information going out in the end is correct. And we do not support the amendment as being proposed. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator from Chittenden North.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to point out that I purposely left out 403B and the other section about the Joint Fiscal Office, because I understand that there are numbers and things that may want to be kept confidential, but I believe information technology is an exception. Thank you.
Question is, shall the bill be amended as proposed by the senator from Chittenden North? Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed, nay.
No.
The nays appear to have it. The nays do have it, and you have not amended the bill as proposed by Senator Renner. Are there any further amendments? Seeing none, please listen to the third reading of the bill.
H 883, an act relating to making appropriations for the support of government.
A roll call has been requested. Having heard the third reading of the bill, the question is, shall the bill pass? Are you ready for that question? Oh, I believe that is the senator from Orleans for a fourth time with a ringing phone. If we were not so well disposed to him for his long years of service, something horrible might happen at this juncture.
It's a cheery tune.
Thank you, Senator from Essex. If you could take possession of the phone.
Well, Mr. President, I had shut it off last time. I never thought he figured out how to turn it back on.
Well handled. Senator from Chittenden Southeast.
Thank you, Mr. President. My district mate, my seatmate to my right said he noticed when I look like I'm going to stand up, and I hadn't before when we were just discussing the amendment that creates the contingent unobligated appropriations. I think we always hesitate to point out things that we like, lest our head get chopped off or something draws too much attention. But I've just noticed that there's a lot of thank you to the Appropriations Committee and to the chair, but I have a question, but I can't support it, but it doesn't meet all my needs. And it's always struck me when I've heard of the budget talked about as a moral document, that that's an incredible weight for the Appropriations Committee to bear, and particularly the chair of the committee. And I think at the end of the day, given that we all have different senses of what's moral and what's right, the most appropriate ethical and moral thing to do is to listen and to weigh and to balance the needs of Vermonters, and to think about who's suffering most, the flood we just came through, how we invest in the right places, and how we continue to grow a prosperous and bright future for our state. And I think this budget very much achieves that. Even when I look at just the last requests I made on top of caring about infrastructure and jobs and housing in the budget and in the contingent appropriations, the chair, your chair of Senate Appropriations, as well as the committee,
really heard our committee on screening for volunteer firefighters for different types of cancer. They put their lives on the line. We have a lot of volunteer firefighters, and they don't get the same access to cancer screening that professional firefighters do. And there's money in contingency for screening our volunteer firefighters for cancer as they put their lives on the line for us. Additionally, we wrestled and fought with just finding a very small appropriation to do forgivable loans for businesses that haven't been helped in the flood, and particularly haven't gotten the support they need. Our committee heard from many immigrant businesses and women-owned businesses and businesses that don't have a footprint necessarily in their communities, who the BGAP dollars were all they got, or they didn't get any help at all. And they've been waiting for this help. We heard about business owners that are suicidal and don't know what they're going to do and are still trying to recover from the flood that took away their livelihood. And a much bigger contingent appropriation needed in here so that they could access grants to recover from the flood. Those are just two examples of very different issues that our committee takes up, that the Appropriations Committee considered in full measure, and added to a list of desperate and growing needs in our state for people to feel less despair, to recover from the flood, to move forward, to take care of their families. So I just wanted to offer my gratitude and say thank you to the Committee on Appropriations, and particularly its chair, without any but, because this is one of the most difficult years many of us have seen who've been here a long time, who've been here through the recession, Tropical Storm Irene, and so on. And this was done with incredible grace and modeling of the best of what we do here. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Question is, shall the bill pass? Are you ready for that question? Roll call has been suggested, so if you are ready, I would ask the secretary to call the roll.
Senator Bray,
Yes.
Senator Brock. No, with explanation. Senator Campion.
Yes.
Senator Chittenden.
Yes.
Senator Clarkson.
Yes.
Senator Caldwell.
Yes, with explanation.
Senator Cummings.
Yes.
Senator Bewley.
Yes.
Senator Hardy.
Yes.
Senator Harrison.
Yes.
Senator Hashim.
Yes.
Senator Engel.
Yes.
Senator Kitchell. Senator Lyons.
Yes.
Senator McDonald.
Yes.
Senator McCormack.
Yes.
Senator Norris.
Yes.
Senator Pershling. Yes. Senator Ron Hinsdale.
Yes.
Senator Sears.
Yes.
Senator Starr.
Yes.
Senator Buhosky.
Yes.
Senator Watson.
Yes.
Senator Weeks.
Yes.
Senator Westman.
Yes.
Senator White.
Yes.
Senator Williams.
Yes.
Senator Renner.
No.
Please listen to the results of your vote. Yay 26, nay 2, and you have passed H 883. We do have two explanations. First, the senator from Franklin.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Senate Appropriations Committee has my deep appreciation and gratitude for the hard work that they have done. They have made a difficult situation better, but unfortunately, they've been unable to prevent us from spending far more than we can afford. Therefore, I must cast a no vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. And the second explanation, the senator from Rutland.
Thank you, Mr. President. I voted yes today to advance the bill in the legislative process, and out of deep respect for members of the Senate Appropriations Committee, my guess is it will now go to a conference committee, and I am hopeful and rooting that the Senate conferees will hold to their position and not agree to any further spending.
Thank you, Senator. We will move at this point in a somewhat roundabout way to H 884, an act relating to the modernization of governance for the St. Albans Cemetery Association. Please listen to the second reading of that bill.
H 884, an act relating to the modernization of governance for the St. Albans Cemetery Association.
Having heard the second reading of the bill, I would look to the senator from Franklin, Senator Norris, for a report from the Committee of Government Operations.
Thank you, Mr. President. Bill is a very short bill being handed out now. I get to report the cemetery bill today. Having said that, I sat there last night thinking about the chicken bill and the poultry parts bill and whatever else. I'm going to try to refrain from using most words or phrases during the reporting of this bill. In Vermont, we have approximately or over 2,000 cemeteries or burial plots located throughout Vermont, of which the oldest I could find was our distinguished senators from Bennington County seem to hold that distinction. The Bennington Center Cemetery was founded in 1762, I believe, and most notably is one of our famous poets, Robert Frost and family, was buried there in 1963. So having said that, in the 1700s, when we were starting to build villages and townships throughout the state of Vermont, one of the quickest ways to identify you were coming upon a town was to be a cemetery outside. So that was easy to rectify or discover that there was a township that you were walking in on. I lost my train of thought right there, but if you bear with me for a second here, we'll work our way through it here. So having said that, ironically, cemeteries don't diminish in size, they grow. And along with the growth, unfortunately, maintenance and costs go up on the cemeteries. And there's a lot of struggling cemeteries in and throughout the state of Vermont. There's still some private cemeteries, which St. Albans Town is one of them, which chose not to go under the auspice of the town and so on and so forth. And they too are struggling financially to maintain their perpetual care in their cemetery. So they asked that we address this issue for them. So in 1901, I believe, they purchased a small plot of land to go along with what they presently have for their 40 acres. And in interim, they now want to sell it so that they can get extra income to maintain their cemeteries. But it appears they can only sell it to another cemetery under this privatization act that they did with the cemetery. So thus the bill we have in front of us today is, while it's a small bill, it is a matter of grave concern in St. Albans. That didn't take long. H 884 is a committee bill to grant the St. Albans Cemetery Association all the powers most cemetery associations have in accordance with Title 18 VSA Chapter 121, the existing cemetery association powers in general law. The St. Albans Cemetery Association was originally chartered by the General Assembly in 1852. Members may not be aware, but prior to 1907, the General Assembly had the power to create not only municipal corporations, but also
Excuse me, Senator, I will take the phone. Please deliver the phone to the podium.
Mr. President, I hope somebody at the front of the room can shut it off.
I did my best. The thing's got a mind of its own.
You need a techie to do that.
Could I ask the doorman to come forward, please? Dennis? I would ask that this be delivered outside the chamber to my office. And I will give it back when we are sure that it won't go off again. Continue, Senator from Franklin.
I'll continue. I'm glad I don't have to start over with you. While many private cemetery associations created during this period have since opted to be absorbed by their towns, the St. Albans Cemetery Association remains a private corporation and needs our approval to exercise the same powers that other cemetery associations have, meaning selling that small plot of land that they purchased later on. in this case, selling that piece of land. Before you ask if the land in question is currently occupied, it is not. And the association plans to use the sale of this parcel to finance the continued maintenance of the cemetery. There has been a tentative agreement negotiated for the sale of this land, but without swift action from this legislature, the deal could prematurely decompose. This act will take effect on passage. They voted out of your government op committee 501. We heard from legislative counsel, Tim Devlin, Mike Gahn, the attorney for the St. Albans Cemetery Association, and the sponsor of the bill, Representative Michael McCarthy, House Government Ops. So we ask for this Senate's concurrence on this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator from Essex.
Mr. President, I'm really kind of shocked that this bill made it over from the House, H 884. I'd heard it was dead on arrival.
Thank you. Question is, shall the bill pass? Shall the bill be read the third time? Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and you have passed H 884. Well, I'm sorry, you have ordered third reading of H 884. We have up at this point H 606, an act relating to professional licensure and immigration status. Please listen to the second reading of the bill.
H 606, an act relating to professional licensure and immigration status.
H 606 was sent to the Government Operations Committee, which reports it favorably. For that report, I would look to the senator from Windsor, Senator White.
That's a hard act to follow. This H 606 is a bill that aims to reduce barriers to professional licensure in Vermont. We all know the challenges of our shrinking workforce and the need to maximize our state's economic potential by employing professionals in occupations that best align with their skills and training, regardless of their immigration status. The main provision in this bill is that an applicant may choose to provide a federal employer identification number, an individual taxpayer identification number, an ITIN, if you're familiar with the acronym, or a social security number on each occasion required by law. All three of these forms of tax identification allow employees to contribute their skills to the workforce and pay income-based taxes. Excitingly, this bill has great timing with some federal changes. It aligns favorably with a change that happened on January 19th of this year, where the IRS began using a modernized electronic application process for those ITINs. Prior to this implementation, applicants had to submit critical documentation by mail and ran the risk of being without it for weeks. This new system will expedite the process and make this form of tax identification most tenable, to be more tenable for as many people as possible. The update would generate more eligible participants in our workforce, so long as we accommodate our state-issued application materials accordingly. Vermont has actually already enjoyed the benefits of a trial implementation of this policy. In the face of our debilitating nurse shortage, which I think we've discussed many times in this room, the Office of Professional Regulation took the initiative to expand access to the nursing profession regardless of immigration status. This policy choice likely saved lives during COVID-19 and continues to do so. And H 606 would expand similar benefits to other jobs in healthcare professions and beyond, to professionals who need qualified staff from professions like radiological technicians, social workers, foresters, substance misuse counselors, CDL drivers, barbers, etc. The list goes on and on. No other state actually has a smaller share of its population in their prime working numbers than Vermont. So that means this bill is even more critical for us than the many other states that passed it. If you look at just taking a snapshot of November 2023, there were 19,000 jobs that lay vacant in Vermont, yet in that same month, 7,544 Vermonters were unemployed. So if you think about that number, even if every unemployed Vermonter had a perfectly matching skill set, perfectly matching interests in geographical location with those open jobs, that would still leave over 11,000 vacant positions, unfilled positions. And unfortunately, that perfect matchup rarely exists, or that people don't have those skills, background, or licenses that are required to fill those positions, and our problem just continues to worsen. In nursing alone, Vermont still needs 9,000 new nurses over the next 5 years to meet our current trend and demand. These vacancies will have severe implications on our economy, our tax base, our quality of care, burnout. Anyone who's been in a hospital in the last few months knows exactly what I'm talking about. Across all Vermont industries, persistent vacancies continue to undermine efficiency and productivity of our local economy and create a supply chain delay in many industries that impact consumer experiences and businesses. To combat this, our joint fiscal office stated that there are actions that could be, quote, there are actions that could be taken to accept, welcome, and help transition foreign-born families and workers that may be affordable and could make a difference. H606 is an example of that. We've seen 10 states implement some form of this policy, and Vermont would be the 11th if we were to move forward. Professional and occupational licenses authorize practitioners of certain professions or trade, such as medicine, teaching, plumbing, electricians, cosmetology. It lets them work in that given industry. And although state government regulates professional licenses through state licensing boards, under federal law, professional licenses cannot be extended to underdocumented, I'm using that very specifically, underdocumented immigrants, unless states affirmatively opt out of those federal restrictions by enacting legislation. Hence why we're here today. This bill passed out of your House Government Operations Committee with a 5-1-0 vote. It passed from the House over on a voice vote. The Office of Professional Regulation supported it. And I'm happy to go through the bill if folks would like to look at the sections on page 2804 of today's Senate calendar. The first section is our purpose. If you are hesitant about this bill and you were looking for maybe some reason to support it because you had concerns about access for folks who are underdocumented, I would point your attention to section C, which specifically highlights that nothing in this act shall be construed to grant eligibility for any other public benefits, if that was a concern of yours that I had heard voiced. Section 2 is where we really make the changes that allow for the licensure of underdocumented folks. The best work that I think our Government Operations Committee did in comparison to what the House sent over was recognizing that in the original bill where Title III, or I believe it's Title III, it might be Title 13, but with the particular title that they had highlighted only covered licenses that were under the Office of Professional Regulation. What your House or what your Senate committee did was say, well, there are other licenses, there are other professions that actually aren't in that title, but may benefit from this bill. So we included other titles like what you see with plumbers, teachers. Lawyers were the only area that we did not delve into because we were trying to make sure that whole separation of powers thing still happened because the judicial branch actually looks at lawyer licensure. Now, section 3 is the effective dates, which would happen on September 1st, 2024. One other change from the House was we made the date sooner. Our witness list included the sponsor of the bill, Representative Esme Cole, go Hartford, Terry Corsones, who we all know from the Vermont Judiciary. We had the director of the Division of Fire Safety. They agreed with us that they would be comfortable with this bill. We had our legislative counsel. We had the executive director of the Vermont Board of Medical Practice. We had Lauren Lehman, general from Office of Professional Regulation. We had Jill Martin Diaz, who's the executive director of the Vermont Asylum Assistance Program. We had Kim McManus, Kim McManus, Associate General Counsel from the Vermont Criminal Justice Council. We had Rep. Nugent. We had Josh Solier, who is the Education Quality Division Director for AOE. And then we also had Patricia Turley, who is the Chair of the Board of Examiners from the Vermont Judiciary. I hope that the Senate will agree with the recommendation of this bill coming from your Government Operations Committee, and I proudly report this bill.
Thank you, Senator. H606 moved from Government Operations to the Finance Committee. For their favorable report, I would look to the senior senator from Windsor.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Finance Committee did consider this bill and determined that its fiscal impact will be minimal, and the vote in committee was 6-0-1.
Thank you, Senator. Question now is, shall the bill be read the third time? Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay.
No.
The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it, and you have ordered third reading of H606. That brings us to H706, an act relating to banning the use of neonicotinoid pesticides. Please listen to the second reading of the bill.
H706, an act relating to banning the use of neonicotinoid pesticides.
Having heard the second reading of the bill, please listen to the favorable report of the Agricultural Committee, and I will look to the senator from Rutland for that report.
Thank you, Mr. President. So by way of background on this bill, many farmers in Vermont and the entire country, for that matter, use what are known as neonic pesticides to control pests during the planting and growing seasons. They were first introduced back in the 80s and are very effective in controlling pests like seed corn maggots and wireworms. The downside of their use is they are also very toxic to pollinators, especially the honeybee. There are two ways of using neonics. One is by spraying a crop, and the other way is to use treated seeds. This bill will ban their use on both of those methods of application. New York has become the first state in the country and has passed legislation that will ban their use beginning in 2029. Senate Ag Committee has taken many weeks of testimony. We heard from 32 witnesses, and the bill before you today is a strike-all amendment, which you can find on page 2805 of today's calendar. Section 1 is the findings, which we did not change at all from what was sent over by the other body. It addresses the harm that pesticides have been proven to pose to pollinator species. You can read those if you like. Section 2 adds the following definitions to the statutory chapter on the control of pesticides. Agricultural commodity means any food in its raw or natural state, including all fruits or vegetables that are washed, colored, or otherwise treated in their unpeeled natural form prior to marketing. Agricultural emergency means an occurrence of any pest that presents an imminent risk of significant harm, injury, or loss to agricultural crops. Bloom means the period from the onset of flowering until the petal fall is complete. Crop group means the groupings of agricultural commodities specified in 40 CFR section 180. Environmental emergency means any occurrence of any pest that presents a significant risk of harm or injury to the environment, or any significant harm, injury, or loss to agricultural crops, including any exotic or foreign pest that may need preventive quarantine measures to avert or prevent that risk, as determined by the Secretary of Agriculture, Food, and Markets. Ornamental plants mean perennials, annuals, and ground cover purposely planted for aesthetic reasons. Senate Ag Committee proposes to remove turf from the prohibition on application of neonic pesticides. Section 3 begins the prohibition on the use and sale. We'll treat the article seeds first. Section 3 prohibits a person from selling, offering for sale or use, distributing, or using any neonic treated seed article seed for soybeans or for any crop in the cereal grains crop group. Secretary of Agriculture, after consultation with ANR, may issue a written exemption order to suspend that prohibition on the use of the neonic treated article seed for a period of not more than 1 year. The Senate Ag Committee, by the way, the amendment proposes to change the written exemption order process. The House would have required the agency to complete detailed scientific evaluations of the agricultural seed market or the effects of a proposed pesticide on pollinator populations. The agency testified they did not have the expertise or the resources to complete those evaluations. So the Senate Ag Committee is proposing an exemption process that follows the exemption process in New York. Person seeking the exemption order shall complete an integrated pest management training provided by the secretary or an approved third party. The person seeking the exemption shall complete a pest risk assessment and then submit a pest risk assessment report to the secretary. Any seeds authorized for use under the exemption order shall be planted only on the property or properties identified in the pest risk assessment report, and the person seeking the exemption shall maintain records of that assessment report and records of when treated seeds are planted. The written exemption order shall be only valid for 1 year. It'll specify the types of neonicotinoid treated article seeds to which the exemption order applies, the date on which the exemption order takes effect, and the exemption order's duration. A written exemption order may establish restrictions on the use of the treated article seeds to which the exemption order applies to minimize harm to pollinator populations, bird populations, ecosystem health, and public health, or establish other restrictions related to the use of the seeds to which the exemption order applies that the Secretary of Ag considers necessary. When a written exemption order is issued, the Secretary of Agriculture is required to submit a copy to the General Assembly, and the General Assembly shall post the order to the General Assembly's website. The Secretary of Agriculture, after consultation with ANR, may rescind an exemption order at any time. Section 4 addresses the prohibited uses of neonic pesticides. These are the ones that are sprayed on. Beginning July 1st, 2025, Section 4 prohibits the following uses of neonic pesticides that are not the treated seeds: the outdoor application of neonic pesticides to any crop during bloom, the application of neonic pesticides to soybeans or any crop in the cereal grains group, the outdoor application of neonic pesticides to crops in the leafy vegetables, brassica bulb vegetables, herbs and spices, and stalk, stem, and leaf vegetable crop groups. Secretary of Ag may issue the exemption order to suspend that prohibition for a period of not more than a year. And just like with the seeds, the Senate Agriculture Committee's amending the exemption order in a similar way. Section 5 is a conforming amendment. Currently, the neonic pesticides are required to be regulated as restricted use pesticides except for certain exemptions. But one of those current exemptions is for the use of the treated seed. Since such seeds will be prohibited, the exemption for them must be struck in order to avoid confusion. Section 6, the General Assembly previously required the Secretary of Ag to propose rules to establish BMPs for the use of the pesticides. Section 6 directs that those rules should include BMPs for the use of treated article seeds and pesticides prior to the effective dates of the relevant prohibitions on their use. The rules shall also include BMPs for the agricultural use after July 1st, 2025 of neonic pesticides, the use of which is not otherwise prohibited under law. Section 7 changes a cross-reference for the due dates of rules containing those BMPs for treated article seeds. The 2024 due dates for rules would not apply to the new rulemaking requirements under Section 6, which we just went over. Section 8 is a contingent repeal. Senate Agriculture Committee added this section that would repeal the Vermont prohibitions on the use of the treated seeds or the pesticides if the similar provisions in New York are repealed. Section 9 is the effective dates, findings, revised BMP rulemaking, and the conforming amendments. Sections 5 and 7 take effect on passage. Senate Agriculture amended the effective dates for the prohibition on pesticides and the use of the treated article seed. The prohibited use of the pesticides will take effect on July 1st, 2025, as the House proposed. But if the New York prohibition on the use of those pesticides on ornamental plants is not in effect, the Vermont law would also not be effective until the New York prohibition is in effect. And finally, the prohibition on the use of the treated article seed will take effect January 1st, 2031, which is 2 years later than the House proposal. But if the New York prohibition on the use of neonic treated seeds is not in effect, the Vermont law would not be effective until the New York prohibition is in effect. As I mentioned, we took testimony from 32 witnesses. I'll be glad to share the list with anyone who is interested. Committee vote was 4-1-0, and we ask that the Senate concur. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. H706 did move to the Appropriations Committee, and for that report, I would look to the senator from Lamoille. Excuse me.
Mr. President, the Appropriations Committee reviewed the strike all amendment that came to us concerning neonics in section 3 and 4, which start on page 2808 of today's calendar. You can find the two sections that had some relationship to expenditures of the state. And I will read what the fiscal note from April 22nd of this year said. The exemption order process, which would start in fiscal year 2026, could require additional staff time at the Agency of Agriculture to implement. The additional workload could create budgetary pressures if there is a need for more staff to complete the exemption. However, the potential pressure is likely to be limited. What we heard was this exemption process is almost exactly the way that New York and Ontario are, and is very similar to Quebec. In Quebec, their exemption process had, with over 1 million acres of cropland, had somewhere around 20 exemptions granted. If an example in Vermont with 90,000 acres, it would probably be less than 2 that the ag agency would face. So we found very minimal effect on the state's fiscal position. We approved it in appropriations 601.
Thank you, Senator from Lamoille. The question is, shall the bill be amended as proposed by the Committee on Agriculture? Are you ready for that question? Senior Senator from Bennington.
President, I inquire the reporter of the bill.
Porter will be interrogated.
Mr. President, I was pleased to hear that the other body was having problems with the bill and that you solved them. So I'd like to better understand the agriculture emergency. I'm looking on page 2807. Means an occurrence of any pest that presents an imminent risk of significant harm, injury, or loss. But could that also include things that wouldn't be neonicotinoids? So in other words, they could declare an agricultural emergency and use a pesticide of any type, evidently, even if it affected the bees, even though the bees weren't the problem, or the neonicotinoids weren't the problem. I'm a little concerned about that. And I don't know if the committee heard testimony on being more specific as to the emergency that was caused by the ban on the neonicotinoids.
I thank the senator for the question. I'm reading through that definition, and I would just say in answer that if there is an environmental emergency or an agricultural emergency, is I think what you're referring to, it would be up to the Secretary of Agriculture, Food and Markets to make that determination.
Yeah, but I guess, well, I will delay that Well, I guess my concern, Mr. President, is that there's no connection between the neonicotinoid and the agricultural emergency in the definition.
We take a 1-minute recess.
I will declare a brief recess. Senate will come to order. Senator from Windsor.
Mr. President, my next area of inquiry is tying ourselves to New York. I'm not a big fan of New York, as you know. But are we doing that because we might face a lawsuit and we're looking for a big state to join us? I'm sorry, yes, may I inquire the report?
You may.
Are we doing that because we might face a lawsuit? And what if Maine did the same bill after Vermont and said, hey, you know, I'm concerned that we're tying ourselves to one big state, but other states may be doing it and we're stuck out there waiting for New York.
Thank you, Mr. President. My view is it's strictly an economy type of situation. So if I can explain it, as the senator from Lamoille mentioned in his report, New York has about 1 million acres of cropland. Vermont has about 90,000 acres. So for Vermont to be alone and be ahead of New York in terms of the dates and what we're doing, there would not be enough economic pressure on the seed manufacturers to change what they're offering the Vermont farmers, which right now is 100% treated or treated seed. So it's not a legal fear. I don't think it's more that the manufacturer wouldn't feel that economic pressure to change what they're doing. And with New York aboard, I think it makes more of a case for them to do that.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for the answers. Very helpful.
Senator from Washington.
May I inquire of the presenter of the bill?
Presenter will be interrogated.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm curious if New York or anyone in the legislature there knows that we are potentially tying our bill to theirs.
I think the Senator, we didn't take any testimony in that regard, but I would be very surprised if they're not aware of what we're doing. We're pretty much across the lake.
Thank you. I think the reporter.
Thank you. The question is, Senator from Chittenden Southeast.
Thank you, Mr. President. May I inquire of the reporter of the bill, please?
Reporter will be interrogated.
So the treated article seeds are being banned in New York on what date?
I thank the Senator for the question. And I'll just read what I did, some research on it. The law in New York would make it illegal to use the neonic pesticide treated seeds to continue using them after the 2029 planting season. Farmers would need to present the evaluation as we've discussed the waiver process. Because the untreated seeds are not available right now, and most farmers have to order seed some 6 to 7 months before the planting season, what would happen is that in the 2028 growing season, those would be treated seeds, and it wouldn't be until 2029 planting season that they could have ordered the untreated seeds, and we would have no way to find out what had happened with the changeover. And that's why the date was important to us.
Is it legal for us to import seeds or acquire seeds from Quebec?
Technically, yes.
Okay, then,
You can import from Canada. There are potentially multiple additional requirements. It's much easier to ship small lots of seed packages, but for larger lots, there may be USDA and Canadian requirements for border crossing, for one thing. So in short, it's not impossible, but it definitely would increase considerations or requirements for the farmers.
so right now, how many provinces in Quebec currently utilize untreated seeds?
I thank you, Mr. President, on Ontario and Quebec.
Okay, and do you know how many acres that might be, given that New York is what, 1 million? I think you said 1 million.
I can find that out before third reading. I don't have that
That would
figure.
be helpful. And are untreated seeds used elsewhere in Europe or other parts of the globe?
Yes, the European Union does have countries which use untreated seeds.
So it seems to me that are the companies that, this perhaps is a third reading question for you as well, but are the companies that produce the seeds that are utilized in Canada, planted in Canada, are they the same companies that produce seeds that are coated seeds, treated article seeds?
I would be glad to get that information before third reading.
Okay, thank you. And then the question then about New York, which is interesting, because if New York is going forward in 2029, then wouldn't it make sense, having our neighbors to the west ordering seeds that are untreated, to have those seeds available in Vermont? Since we're smaller, we've got fewer acres. So
I thank Mr. President for the question. I don't have any idea about the timetable for seed manufacturers and how soon they would have to start gearing up. So
I'm talking about New York. If New York is going to require untreated seeds in 29, then doesn't it make sense that we would have the same opportunity to use untreated seeds here? I mean, I'd rather not kill our bees.
again, I thank the senator for the question. The committee felt strongly, I think, that we wanted to see what was going to happen across the lake in New York with the changeover to untreated seeds, and that can't happen until the 2029 growing season. So we wanted at least the ability to have some experienced look across the lake to see how things were going.
Okay, thank you, Mr. President. And then, thank you. I will, the pesticides that's used to coat the seeds is toxic, and it will continue to have an effect, whether it's on our pollinators or continuing into the food chain or in our water. And it offers a great concern to us about the public health in Vermont. So, Mr. President, I will be offering an amendment on third reading. And I've already spoken with the chair of the committee that I will present that in committee. I understand there's been discussion about dates, but I think it's important for us in this chamber to understand that the quicker we can do this, the more pollinators we save, and the more we eliminate toxic chemicals from our environment that can ultimately affect human population. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator from Windsor.
Thank you, Mr. President. May I inquire of the reporter, Bill?
Porter will be interrogated.
Thank you for your report. I love the fact that we've been dealing with neonicotinoids so long because we now can all pronounce them. I guess I would like to build on the questions of my colleague from Chittenden Southeast. Given that Quebec is our largest trade partner, and both Quebec and Ontario border us and have vastly more crop acres than New York State does, and the wind blows our direction as well. I'm just curious, how long have Ontario and Quebec banned the use of neonicotinoids.
Is this a question for me, Mr.
No,
President?
it's a
or
question for the
Chittenden
reporter.
Southeast?
For the reporter of the bill, I believe.
I believe.
Thank you.
And
I heard
maybe-
Chittenden Southeast, I apologize.
Oh, I'm sorry. I did. I just completely confused it.
And
I apologize. And actually. it
no
may be a
apology
question
necessary.
for Both of them, because,
Actually, let's limit it to one.
okay. So I guess I would begin with the senator from Rutland. I apologize to the senator from Chittenden Southeast. And I would ask the senator from Rutland, did you take testimony from the provinces of Quebec and Ontario?
Thank you, Mr. President. Yes, we did take testimony from folks in Quebec, yes.
Great. And did you, when did they establish the ban on neonicotinoids?
I believe Quebec is now in its 5th year of untreated seeds. I don't know about Ontario, but I will certainly get that before third reading.
Thank you. I'd appreciate that. It's just interesting if we have a province as large as Quebec, just to our north, having worked without neonicotinoids for 5 years. Did they report a robust and a returning healthy bee population? I mean, were those results not compelling?
I thank the senator for the question. We, I believe, took testimony which didn't necessarily show any difference in crop yield. And the bee population figures remained pretty constant from the 5 years that they had not been using them. So I don't know that we have the basis on which to make that distinction. I will mention that the growing conditions, the farther north you go, change dramatically, and that the Vermont farmers are very able right now with the selection of seeds offered by the manufacturers to select exactly what they need. Even within Vermont, as we've seen on occasion with the climate change and the rain falling, you can be 4 or 5 miles away and it could be flooding and your streets are dry. So there are very different conditions in terms of how to grow crops in Vermont, and Quebec is even more so. So you have 90-day corn here, you have 120-day corn. It all depends on the weather and the growing conditions.
Thank you very much. I look forward to the answers that Senator of Rutland will provide. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Question is, Senator from Orleans.
Thank you, Mr. President. The big question, I guess, is following New York, why we're doing that. And we already had one senator say he's not too impressed with his New York friends in his state. And maybe I'm the second one. But if you think about telling a group of basically now young farmers that have been through the University of Vermont, Cornell University, New Hampshire University. If you think about telling them that here's something that their folks were using and that they were using, and now they're using, and that they're not going to be able to use this any longer, and they're getting 18 to 22 to 24 tons of corn per acre, that this is not going to happen any longer, they get very concerned. And to be real honest about it, I don't think we had one farmer come in and support banning the neonics. So to start with, as chair of the Ag Committee, I felt we had a big job of trying to convince them that, hey, we're going to work together on this. We're going to get seeds that are maybe not neonics, but some other seeds available for you. And you're going to be able to certainly continue to grow these crops to feed your animals. And what they testified was that they're so worried that they rely, a lot of our farms are fairly good size, And if they had to drop a third or a quarter in tonnage per acre, that they would have to utilize much more land, which would also cause many more tractor runs over that land, longer to haul the fertilizers from the cows to cover that land, and it was gonna cost them a lot of money. And the one way that we got them on board, or partially on the boat, was to say, well, how can we help you with this? And their answer back to us was, well, give us a year to see what happens in New York, to see what kind of seeds we're gonna be able to purchase. And, you know, if it works out, we'll be with you 100%. And, you know, just getting that done was quite a feat, because they'd rather have just had us kill the bill. Well, you know, we're concerned about our pollinators in the ag room, like all of you folks. And so we pushed the date out, knowing we made some other changes, knowing very well that there would be a conference committee. So we pushed it out an extra year, thinking that, hey, you've got to compromise. So yeah, we'll compromise. We'll back it up a year. And that'll give our farmers a year to see what's happened over there. We've been going 20, 25 years. I mean, what's one more? If you can get them on board and agree to go in this direction. So that's why we moved the date out. It didn't just happen overnight. There was a lot of negotiating and talking and visiting, and not just the 4 days we're here, it was all weekend long in many cases. So I hope you bear with us, and we'll protect our pollinators and move forward with everybody helping to protect them, and not just one group or the other. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. The question again is, shall the bill be amended as recommended by the Committee on Agriculture? Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay.
No.
The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it, and you have amended the bill as proposed by the Committee on Agriculture. Question now is, shall the bill be read the third time? Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and you have ordered third reading of H 706. At this time, we are going to, due to an unfortunate error on my part, for which I apologize, we're going to return to H 606. I inadvertently skipped the step of voting on the Government Operations Committee report. So we will return to that question and take it through from there. So with that said, we are back on H 606, an act relating to professional licensure and immigration status. The question is, shall the bill be amended as proposed by the Committee on Government Operations? Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay.
No.
The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it, and you have amended the bill as proposed by the Committee on Government Operations. And I believe, shall the bill be read a third time? Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay.
No.
The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it, and you have ordered third reading of H 606. That brings us out of the orders of the day. I would look to the senator from Windsor for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. Pending announcements, I move that the Senate be adjourned until Friday, April 26th at 11:30 a.m.
Senator from Windsor has moved that the Senate stand in adjournment pending announcements. Senator from Caledonia.
Mr. President, I would like to move that we suspend our rules and message the action just taken on H883 to the House forthwith.
Senator from Caledonia has moved that our rules be suspended and our actions taken on H883 be messaged to the House forthwith. Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and you have suspended your rules in order to message our actions just taken on H883. Are there further announcements? Senator from Chittenden Southeast.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Health and Welfare will meet at 8:45 tomorrow morning to take up any amendments on our bills. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Finance will meet at 3 o'clock. We have a whole bunch of witnesses waiting.
Senator from Madison.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Government Operations will also meet at 3 o'clock. Thank you.
Senator from Bennington.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Education will meet 10 minutes after the 12 p.m.
Thank you, Senator. Any further announcements? Seeing none, the senator from Windsor has moved that the Senate stand in adjournment until Friday, April 26th at 11:30 a.m. Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and we will stand adjourned until 11:30 Friday, April 26th.